All right. Well, in the Halitics, I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is a Thursday, and I'm especially excited to have a brand new first-time guest, Mary Rooker, with us. Hey, Mary, how are you today?
I'm doing all right, Hal.
All right. And it is green. I guess I won't say green week, but it's sort of green part of the week. Yesterday, we had, of course, Andy Ellis on for a little over an hour. Really enjoyed the conversation there. It was very politically focused. May delve into politics a little bit with the chair of the Montgomery County, Maryland Green Party, Mary Rooker. But the focus is going to be really her, I don't know, would you call it your life's focus? I don't know. You seem so, really, whenever we talk, I mean, you're a vegan. This is really important to you. And sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, I think is that your would you call that your main focus, your life's work even?
It certainly is one of them. I have to admit, ranked choice voting, not today's topic, is another long time, decades-long passion of mine. And just one quick correction. So I'm co-chair of the Montgomery County, Maryland Green Party, but I'm actually secretary at the state level of the Maryland State Green Party. I'm a former co-chair at the state level also, but at the moment, that's Renaud Brown and Brian Bittner.
Okay, I think I said that correctly. Maybe not. I didn't call you co-chair. If you look, you can actually see your title. You should be able to see it at the bottom. Mary Rooker, chair, Montgomery County, Maryland Green Party. But I can make that co-chair if you prefer. I actually will do that. No,
that's fine. That's fine because the co-chair is vacant. The other co-chair is vacant.
So let's just call you the chair. That's perfect. I understood you to be the chair. So that's why I use that title. I, by the way, also am an enormous fan of ranked choice voting. I think it's incredibly important, and it was a topic that Andy and I broached yesterday, including the multi-member district elections via ranked choice voting, single transferable ballot, which I think is probably the best way to have a truly representative parliament or legislative system, although there are certainly other options as well. But we don't really need to delve into that. We can towards the end of the program if you like, Mary. But the issue of, let's call it regenerative ag for a moment. I have a definition. I'm going to show it in a moment. I hope it's I don't want to say I hope it is. Tell us if there's something wrong with this. This actually comes from Chico State University in California. And I know there's questions, regenerative ag with livestock and without. You are an animal-free advocate, but here, can you see that definition I just put up there?
I sure can.
Is this fair as far as you can tell? Reversing climate change seems to be the main focus, according to Chico State. I just copied this. Rebuilding soil organic matter, biodiversity, sequestering more carbon. And then I actually highlighted the animal manures because I want to delve into that. But is this basically what you perceive regenerative agriculture to be?
I would say yes. I would say it aims to reverse climate change, but cannot. And in fact, in some ways, worsens the situation.
Can animal-free regenerative agriculture reverse the burning up of our planet by fossil fuel consumption?
I don't think there is any such thing as animal-free. There's sometimes called stock-free or veganic. It means no domesticated animals. But of course, we don't want to get rid of all the animals, the wild animals. They're a part of ecosystems, an important part of them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I mentioned the pollinators especially, but you even distinguish there. And when we talk about livestock versus wild animals, I'm thinking cows, cattle versus deer or elk as ruminants that some are actually born sort of as free as I guess you can be in today's United States, whereas cows obviously are born in bondage or whatever term you want to use and live their entire lives as property. So very, very different. But even with respect to insects, there are wild bees, as you mentioned, and I guess domesticated bees. So what's the importance in your view of relying on wild bees, wild hives to pollinate our plants?
Well, I think this, I want us to make sure we hold on to the big picture here, which is the importance is the most important thing for survival of humans and all life on Earth is actually the survival of ecosystems and the interdependent web of existence that we are all dependent on to survive. And so when you take, it's not so much domesticated animals versus wild animals as, because wild animals might not be native to a region either. So the real distinction is between native animals to an ecosystem and non-native animals. And of course, the cows, the chickens, the pigs, these are all Eurasian animals. They aren't part of any ecosystem in this hemisphere. And the grasses and the other things they eat are not native here either. So we have to bring in non-native grasses, plant them over large swaths of land. And we're replacing basically the apex native grasses with non-native Eurasian grasses. And we're replacing the native apex herbivores with non-native apex herbivores. And you can't get diversity that way. And it's the same with the pollinators. The bees are not the only pollinator. They're the first one that most of us think of, but they're only one of many. And they're actually, the bees that we provide, that we get our honey from and that we use, are all the European honeybee. So we're, again, using a non-native invasive species that is harming the native bees. And it's a nightmare. You know, once you start going down this path of let's bring in non-native domesticated species to try to solve our problems, there's a trophic effect, a knockdown effect that has other impacts all the way up and down the line, and none of them are helpful.
Well, and I was thinking, even when you have like non-native pest species, then you bring in a non-native, I guess, enemy of that pest, which then creates more problems rather than solving the one you were trying to address in the first place. Well, you said there's, obviously it's a nightmare. How do we address that while still generating enough calories to feed a planet that probably naturally would be able to sustain fewer than 1 billion people? Now we have 8-9 times that many.
Well, you're really asking the question that is the title of George Monbiot's book. He's an investigative journalist at The Guardian in England. And his question is, how do we feed the world without devouring the planet? Right? And that's the question. How do we feed everybody without destroying life on Earth? And yes, human overpopulation is a big problem. We need to get back within the carrying capacity of the planet. But another problem is the overpopulation of cattle and chickens. Like 70% of all fowl birds on the planet are chickens, turkeys, and domesticated ducks. There are farmed animals. There aren't that many wild birds left. So we need to make sure that whatever we're doing makes room for all life on Earth to continue. And the irony is that the easiest way to feed the most people with the least amount of land and water and pollution is actually to have most of the world's people, and here I'm talking particularly about people in rich countries like ours, to go at least 90% plant-based. I don't know if you're familiar with Eat Lancet, but they actually have worked to address the very question that you just asked. And they have a different answer for people in Africa, and Asia and South America and North America and Europe, depending on your country. And the richer countries are the ones where their changes really need to be made to their agricultural systems. Because the agricultural systems used by most non-rich peoples is much more sustainable already.
You're watching Halitics. We've got Mary Rooker with us. Let me get the subscribe button there right in the middle of the screen there for you. Please do click like, click subscribe. I want to keep the momentum going as we get more and more subscribers, and we're able to bring you great programs like today's with Mary Rooker. If we in the United States, Europe, Japan, other wealthy nations, Australia, transition away from our consumption of animal products and meat especially, to plant-based diet, will that necessitate putting actually more soil under tillage because it will require more fields to grow more wheat, to grow more corn, rice, etc.? Or am I thinking totally in the wrong direction when you talk about plant-based diets?
Well, that's a great question and an important one to answer. So if you look at land use, human land use all over the world, only about 1% of it is, urban areas like I live in, cities. And we think, and we certainly are rightly concerned about the need for what's called smart growth, which is actually, there's no such thing as growth that's smart, but that's another podcast, right?
Well, less stupid growth. How about we go with that?
Yeah. Or degrowth. But anyway, as I said, that's a whole nother podcast. So most of the land use, human land use on the planet, is actually for food, for crops and ranching, for plants and animals that we raise for food. But something like 80% of that is for ranching alone, even though it only gives us about 1% of our protein and a small 13% or so of our calories. So to use that much land for such a small amount of protein and calories just does not make any sense. So the problem isn't the crops we're growing. And most of the crops we're growing aren't even for human consumption. They're to feed the domesticated animals. So you could probably just stick to the exact same number of amount of land we're using now for crops and just don't feed it to animals, use that land to feed to humans and be fine.
So, or that's good to hear, because obviously that would be a concern if we had to actually use even more of our limited amount of available land. And it would also take it from the few wild animals that remain on the planet and indigenous peoples to the extent they're still able to survive as well in this modern world. Are you? Well, let me ask it this way, because when I was watching some videos about regenerative agriculture, they tended to be from the standpoint of farmers who have livestock, who have pigs, who have chickens, who have cows, cattle, but they talk about a different way. They use the manure to help fertilize their land. They rotate the animals through fields, that kind of thing. There does seem to be value in terms of using the animal waste to add nutrients to the soil and make it more productive. How do you do that in a livestock-free, veganic agriculture mode?
Yeah, thank you. Again, another great question. So we have. I
appreciate that, by the way, Mary. Thank you for the compliment. I'm glad you understood it, because I was struggling with the language there, and you used the term veganic, which I like, because I knew, and I've seen, you said there's no such thing as animal-free agriculture. That's how I saw it, but I had seen that term, so I was using it kind of as a, just sort of as an overarching, but veganic meaning the animals aren't there to be consumed by humans, nor are they owned or controlled by humans.
Right. And the other term is stock free, meaning you're not using livestock Wild animals are fine. They're not the problem. It's livestock that's the problem. And I've gotten derailed now. Your question, I think it was how
do we fertilize fields without using nitrogen, which is a petroleum product, which is obviously terrible when we're talking about the climate crisis, which, folks, by the way, just want to say we didn't start with this, but 2025 on pace to be one of the 3 hottest years ever. The hottest 2 right now are 23 and 24. So it'll be the last 3 will be the 3 hottest. And by the way, Mary, just on that exact topic, I've heard people say, see, it's not going to be the hottest, so it's getting cooler. The whole idea is false. Just because, 24 was the hottest, 25 won't be, so it must be getting cooler. I've actually heard people use that argument, I think, unironically.
The amount of disinformation that's out there is just overwhelming. I think it was Mark Twain who said something like, a lie has gone all the way around the world several times while the truth is still putting on it, tying its shoelaces.
Putting its pants on, I think, before the truth can get. I guess it's been paraphrased in many ways. I always heard the truth is putting on its pants, but one way or the other.
It's certainly true.
How do we fertilize our soil without using fossil fuel products or stock?
Right. And one of the lies that's around the world is that we need, because I hear this all the time from permaculture folks, we need domesticated animals for their manure to fertilize the land. And I'm like, how do you think life on Earth existed before humans came along and domesticated these species? Imagine that. So to answer your question more directly, the answer is sometimes called green manure. You use cover crops themselves and plow them under when planting time comes. The irony to me is that it's talked as though animal manure, domesticated animal manure, is somehow superior to any other system. And in fact, it's too much. It's actually causing nitrogen and phosphorus tipping points, which we've already exceeded the safe limits of. So it doesn't just go into the soil. The plants can only absorb so much of it. The rest of it goes down into the water table and then from there into the water cycle, causing dead zones everywhere. So if you want to have domesticated animals, you need to have a tiny, tiny amount on a tiny amount of land.
Can one rely on wild native species to fertilize land under tillage?
Well, you don't need to. The crops themselves can take care of that when you're trying to grow crops. There are alternatives to that also fertilize the soil. It's ironic. We think we need to fertilize our trees. If you leave the leaves, that's nature's own natural mulch and time-release fertilizer. Plants know how to take care of themselves, especially if they're in a more natural setting. And then, of course, in a farmed setting.
But a natural setting, let me just interrupt real quick, but a natural setting does include animals. It includes birds. It includes native, large fauna.
Wild animals.
Native insects. So
yeah, but they're wild and they're native. And without the native plants,
would you take away fences? Would it be better to not? You need some fences, I assume, but I guess I'm just trying to think how far back to the kind of untamed land do we go? And using these techniques, can we produce enough calories again to feed what is now, and I believe we both agree, and everyone agrees, is an overpopulated planet?
Yeah, it is overpopulated. I don't know if you're familiar with Eat Lancet, but it's a group of 36 scientists from all over the world, 16 different countries, who collaborated to produce the Eat Lancet report. And it's an earth scientists and nutrition scientists, the top people the top scientists from all over the world. And their recommendation is that we can, even in rich countries, produce more than enough food to feed everybody. And now it's not saying that each country will produce all their own food, because I'm not sure that's possible. I know there's a whole eat local only food movement. And if you can get that to work, that's fine, but not every region can. So we don't want people going hungry just because they're living in the wrong place, right? But it's going to require significant changes to our diets. And like I said, the good news is you can still have a small amount of animal products, but it's got to be just like 10% of calories or less. And of course, less is better for the environment. And we often romanticize these older systems, you know, Little House on the Prairie and even indigenous foodways. And I think we need to realize that those are things that will work if you're within the planet's carrying capacity. We're not remotely there. So we're going to need to keep some food systems, some crop growing systems going. And I would hope that those would be organic, you know, that they would also be more natural. And there are problems with organic too. I don't want to get started on that. But the Eat Lancet scientists laid out a lot of information about detailed information about how to make this happen. And I would say to anybody who wants to eat more than 10% of their calories from animals, especially in rich countries, we might want to keep some factory farming, because it is more efficient. Neither one of these is an environmental winner.
Well, it is essential, as you're saying, that we cut back, that we consume less. And the panel, and you, by the way, you referred this article in one of your writings, and I have it somewhere, but I looked this up. This was from The Guardian last year. We asked 380 top climate scientists what they felt about the future, and they're terrified. This is in 24. They just don't see us keeping the amount of carbon or fossil fuels that we burn to keep the CO2 below all sorts of terrible tipping points, some of which we've already zoomed past. And one of the big one of the big problems they see is inequality, because the West consumes so much. And as you were pointing out, and this is exactly what you were saying, the global South does not probably overconsume. If we reduced our consumption to their levels, then we'd probably be okay and could move towards transitioning. But what I think most economists, or virtually all that I hear of most political leaders, if not all, talk about is not the West reducing its consumption levels per capita. It's bringing up the third world to Western consumption levels. Right. And that would be a way that reducing inequality would actually make the problem even worse.
Right. And then there's a couple of problems there. One is that most of these people who are poor around the world are already consuming maybe 10% of their calories from animal parts and products. They're already doing what Eat Lancet is asking us to do. If they try to and most of them are not getting enough calories, period. That's a huge problem. But if they try to come up to our levels, the US, depending on which report you're looking at, is either the number 1 or number 2 consumer of animal parts and products. We would need, 8 planets or something, a lot. If everybody tried to eat it, we just don't have that. We don't have that. And it can't just be any planet. It's got to be a planet like ours that has the miracle of life. I love the slide you showed. The one of from the Guardian. Yeah, the scientists warning and everything. The inequality. There are 1 to 2 billion people who need to increase their electric consumption because they don't have enough to do anything. And then here's the U.S. And in the U.S. The United Nations said in the last year, we really need to make drastic changes everywhere. It needs to be everything, everywhere, all at once for people in countries like ours. And this is echoing the March 2023 scientists' final warning. I hear this a lot. They're all just like, we don't get it. And we're often even focusing on fossil fuels and ignoring agriculture, when agriculture is such a huge part of the problem. And even if we did all the fossil fuels things and everything else the scientists are recommending and didn't touch agriculture, life on Earth is not going to make it. Agriculture is too big a part of the problem. We have to be willing to look at this.
Yeah, there's two kind of very connected aspects to the problem of agriculture. One is what we've just been talking about, the actual foods that are produced. And animal products require a lot of CO2 to be generated in order to produce a certain number of calories. And then the actual methods that are used, whether for plants or animals, are also extremely inefficient in terms of the number of the amount of carbon that's burned, or fossil fuels that are burned to produce it. So we have two big problems. And this is from I don't remember which group this is, Terra Planet or something, Understanding Land-Based Economy, Ag, Greenhouse Gases 101. And so this is from last year, and they talk about very specifically how much the agriculture sector contributes to this problem. And according to this slideshow, it's 34%. It's an enormous sector in terms of the contribution to the ever hotter planet on which we have consigned for ourselves and our children. It's really extraordinary, and they talk about a lot of the exact same issues that we've been addressing as well. But some of it is not where you're going, because they do not reject to the degree that you do, Mary. Regenerative agriculture using stock, but there it is, 34%. And then site-specific, I think site-specific nutrient management is what you're talking about with the cover plants, for example, and that could really help reduce reductions. And of course, also a big problem, and this is what I was really getting to with the question about fertilizing, not just the animal products or the nitrogen, which is fossil fuel created, but the use of machinery. Heavy equipment is a very significant generator of fossil fuels as well. The combines, the tractors that are used, the broadcasters all burn gasoline. How do we get around that?
Well, Eat Lancet again would say regenerative systems they actually recommend some of these regenerative systems, but it has to be on such a small amount of land that it's going to be frustrating, I think, to most meat eaters. It's not just reduce your consumption, it's drastically cut. Be 90%.
Is it just meat eaters though? Because if you think about the acres and square mile of corn or wheat in these monoculture farms we see across the country. And I understand, for example, soybeans are pretty much grown almost only for livestock, but the wheat is grown for our bread that we eat and other, rolls, the hamburger rolls, whatever, but that's not meat itself. Corn as well, mostly for livestock, but people eat corn. Corn is used for beer, for all sorts of products. So, can we grow those products? And you're saying Eat Lancet says yes, we can grow those products on much smaller farms with a variety of crops, on a smaller plot, I assume.
Right, and everybody thinks that. If we just switch to regenerative systems or rotational systems, I was trying to think, I actually made a list one day of all the different so-called regenerative systems that I've looked at. There's regenerative systems with domesticated animals. There are regenerative systems with without domesticated animals that are veganic and stock free. There's rotational grazing, there's silvopasture, there's agroecology, permaculture, and then of course there's cultured lab meats. Cultivated basically the way beer is. There are meat alternatives, and there's precision fermentation. Okay. And there also are indigenous farming systems. And so everybody says, oh, factory farming is the problem. If we just go regenerative, it's fine. It's okay if you really severely limit how much land you're using. The problem with regenerative systems is that they use 270% of the amount of land of conventional factory farms. And that's even when you factor in the land for the crops to be grown. There's just not enough earth already for the way we're eating, the animals we're eating. And if you're going to have to increase that by basically triple it, that's just not going to work. This is a very simple math problem. There just isn't enough land for these rotational systems. But everybody thinks that that these regenerative systems are sustainable, and they aren't. Everybody thinks that they're natural, but they aren't. Everybody thinks that they're just the best way we can go, and they aren't. And they also think that indigenous systems will work. And again, indigenous systems can work for a good model, and they can work if you're within the carrying capacity of the planet. But if you're not, you really need different systems. And everybody's upholding these indigenous systems, but they, for the most part, until white people contact came, they didn't domesticate animals. Most of the world's indigenous peoples and cultures are traditionally, they eat small amounts of meat, most of them, but they're getting them from wild animals. They're not getting them from domesticated animals
that they hunted or fished.
Right. Well, they didn't just hunt and fish. They, I recommend Lila June. She's a Dene woman who not only has studied indigenous foodways around the world, but actually wrote her PhD thesis on it. So she knows a lot. And she says it's not just that we fished using sustainable small nets instead of trawlers that disturb the ocean floor. It's that if we wanted to eat oysters, we would, and I can't remember now if it was oysters or clams, but we understood they needed kelp habitat along the seashore. So we expanded kelp. We grew more kelp along the seashore. And that increased the number of clams and oysters. And that way they were able to eat off the interest instead of the principal. So they were still able to leave a lot of food for the wild marine life that also depended on eating clams and oysters. And the same with the prairies. They saw, oh, the bison like these tough grasses. We'll plant more of these tough grasses and make sure there's a nice abundant food supply. And then the bison, they're actually bison, they will come to us and we'll increase the number of bison. So there'll still be plenty of bison for the wild predators to eat, and we can have the rest. So
well, as I understand it, this was one of the videos I watched, just let me jump in for a sec, about the bison, is that the bison had a very symbiotic relationship with the grasses. So more bison actually meant more grass as well, because they would trample up the soil so that more of the seeds could get deeper in, and their manure was not as dense or as rich, so it didn't over fertilize to the point where you had too much grass that it was crowding itself out and destroying the richness of the soil. I'm sure I'm getting a lot of this wrong, but that was sort of my 101 understanding. And I just to see the chart I just put up, that pie chart also from that Terra group, which I think is very useful, is it does show you just how great the animal products contribute, how significant their contribution is to the greenhouse gas emissions, because almost all of that chart relates to animals. 20% livestock manure, 39% enteric fermentation. That's like the cow belches or the farts or whatever you want to call it that cause the problem. So that's well over half. the synthetic fertilizers, I mentioned that, the nitrogen. You had 10% from rice cultivation. That is also an issue with all the diversion of water and that's used. Manure management, again, that's the animals. And so the other part, so much smaller percentage from crops. But even there, Mary, the crops are grazed in monoculture and in ways that tend to create more greenhouse gases than could be done with smaller, native species, et cetera. But you're saying you don't believe, I'm sort of get a little confused by what you said. Are you rejecting regenerative ag, even if it's stock-free regenerative ag? No.
No, not at all.
Okay.
And in fact, in some ways, the original regenerative agriculture was plant-based. And then other people said, well, we want to eat the animals, so let's try to weave the animals into the system. And so they replaced the animal manure with the green cover crops and, so on and so forth. They adapted that. The original title, I think, was conservation agriculture.
So you're saying, but you made an interesting point there that people want to eat animals. So how do you get folks to not, or to drastically cut back? You and I had a very interesting conversation where you said, hey, when it comes to people who hunt, if they fish, they consume what they actually, kill, you're less uncomfortable with that because you're a vegan, you're an animal, I don't want to say lover exactly, but you value the animal life as a human life. And I think that's admirable. And I share that view. But I like to eat meat, and I've told you that. So how do you get people? And I understand everything you're saying, and I'm willing to cut back for sure. And I don't eat a lot, but I do eat some. How do you get people who say, you know what? Life is short. I'm going to die anyway. Maybe I'll die 5 years earlier than I would otherwise. Maybe I won't if I eat meat. And anyway, it's too late. We're already past the point of no return. The planet's already dying. So I might as well, party, like it's 1999.
Yeah, I have my days when I think the same thing. It's already game over. And why do I keep trying? And I think, like a lot of these scientists that you quoted, it's just like, what do? It's human nature not to want to change. We change readily when we're motivated to do so. I mean, think of it, when I was growing up, jogging was something you only did to your memory. You would jog your memory. Jogging was a whole new thing, and it became an industry. It caught on like wildfire. So we can change fairly quickly when we want to, but nobody wants to hear bad news about their about their bad habits.
Right.
We only want to hear good news. And it's just part of the way we're wired. So I'm not sure we'll make it. And I would simply say to somebody who said what you just said, do you have children? Or, I chose not to have children, but I have nieces and nephews, and great nieces and nephews. And I worry terribly about what life is going to be like for them. In about 30 years, I will almost certainly be dead and gone, but they'll still be here, and they won't even be my age at that time. What is their life going to be like? If you picture the scales of justice, and on one balanced side is, oh, I don't want to change, and I like what I'm eating, and it's too hard to change, and I'll have to learn new things, and I don't want to do that. And then if on the other side of the scale, you have the fate of all life on Earth. Like, really? Your personal taste buds, and your taste buds are even adaptable. They will change as you change what you eat. So you're not willing to make a temporary change for something that has this much at stake? All life on Earth. I remember Carol J. Adams is a feminist who said, change may be hard, but not changing is harder.
Well, it's deadlier. At this point, for sure.
And most of us are living on denial. We're in denial about the impact on life on Earth. And I often joke at my Unitarian Universalist congregation, when we serve animal foods, if there was a sign over it showing this chicken you're eating came from a factory farm, and there was a little video, a 1-minute video of the lifespan of that animal, including the slaughter, most people would not eat it. If we weren't in denial, we wouldn't be eating the way we're eating.
Oh yeah, and not just the chickens, but like even the eggs, the way they're hatched in these horrible factories. I watched one of those videos of the regenerative agriculture, and the farmer was showing the chickens and talking about how they're in this pen, in this enclosure, and it's supposed to be much more humane than when they're in the coops, I guess. And it's definitely more humane than being in a coop. But I was like, man, those chickens are really close together. They're still pretty small, pretty penned in. They don't have a lot of free movement. It didn't seem like an ideal environment for a chicken, as far as I could tell, but maybe I'm wrong. But that's supposed to be the regenerative agriculture. I thought from the video, the pigs, the cattle had it a little better. They did seem to get to move around. They weren't confined. So, as long as they weren't being eaten, their days weren't so bad. But the chickens, it seemed, even in this regenerative ag farm that did use livestock or did raise livestock, were, I don't know. It seemed a little bit cruel to me, but I don't know. Just describing the view I had. But I know you would say all of it is cruel. They're all controlled by humans. But at least for the pigs and the cows, as I said, they had movement. They were outside, because in a lot of these farm environments, they're just in these horrible enclosures. They don't have fresh air. They don't have breezes, nothing. So 240-242-5646. We can take a call or two. We've got Mary Rooker with us. Love to talk to you as well. Your thoughts, your concerns. Now, Mary, you said you didn't have kids. And I didn't want to have kids. And a big reason I want to have kids was because of exactly what we're going through right now, the dying of our planet. But it was really important to my wife. And I made a decision that, 2 is is below the replacement level. So I'll go along with that. And of course, I love my children, so they're a joy to me. But it's in our genes, is it not, to destroy ourselves? I mean, isn't this just perhaps why we don't even have any contact with other worlds? Presumably in the universe, there have been other intelligent life forms such as humans that have developed the capacity as we have to reach across the heavens to other planets. And yet, as far as we can tell, we really haven't found radio waves from any of them. Is that because it's in our genes to devour ourselves and everything around us before we are able to journey to distant worlds?
Well, this is actually a very controversial thing. If you talk to Westerners, they would say exactly what you said. But if you talk to the indigenous peoples that I've studied who talk about indigenous foodways, they would say humans actually play a very important role in the larger ecosystem of the planet. And when we're fulfilling that function, adding more kelp forests, adding more, of the proper native grasses, and allowing wild animals to share the bounty of what we produce, and it's a very different system. And they say, the planet is actually better off because of us. And then there's an engineer named Sailesh Rao, Saileshrao. He's from India, and he says we can actually help with maintaining this stable climate that allows life on Earth to flourish. So it depends on who you're talking to. But certainly if you're coming from a Western colonizer mentality where our job is to dominate and not even really care, then yeah, it's the answer you were talking about. We talk about, people don't know, there's a lot of humane wash, and people don't know what humane really looks like. If you looked at and asked yourself, if we were doing the same thing to dogs, would we be okay with this? None of them live past a year old. As soon as they get to early adulthood, their market weight. We send them off to slaughter. We separate moms from babies because we need the dog milk for us. And chickens are not at all natural. It's not just that they're confined, which is bad enough. If you were eating eggs in a natural setting, you would only have them once or twice a year, because birds don't lay eggs year round, including chickens. The female reproductive system of these chickens has been engineered, and there are other things that are done to make sure these eggs are producing 200 to 300 eggs a year. If they were natural animals in the wild, the Burmese red jungle fowl they come from only lays 1 or 2 clutches a year of 10 to 20 eggs.
That's a lot of eggs, though. Wow.
Yeah.
But I mean, not like today. They do it every day they lay an egg.
So the female reproductive system has been massively exploited. It's as though if these were humans, we had nonstop menstrual cycles.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying. That's fascinating, because
it would be inhumane if it applied to people.
It's fascinating. Even dogs. Because we have these robins. We have robins all over our yard and everything. And so they lay eggs, and I watch them. I love to watch the robins, and they build the nest and the this and the that. And the mom will lay her eggs, but then she lays the eggs and she goes off and flies around a little bit before she sits down and settles on them for a while. But she might have 2 or 3 a year. It's not just one, but the robin babies, the hatchlings, after about a week or so, they're done. They just leave the nest, and then she goes on and does her thing. They're so funny. They're the dad or the mom, whoever's, because it's not always the mom who's there. Sometimes it's, well, the mom will be usually more with the babies, but then the dad comes with the food. And they're so annoying. They stick their beaks up and they're squawking, and then the dad has to quickly fly back, and I'm sure they're delighted but then they go ahead and do it again. So even though it's a hard work and they're not loving doing it, I'm sure at times they keep doing it because that's just what they're naturally doing. You mentioned native or indigenous peoples who are more sustainable. They, like the Yosemite Indians that used to follow the bison down into the California Valley and then back up, and they would eat their fish. And, it seemed like they had a pretty sustainable life for centuries, if not millennium. But again, they were ultimately supplanted by a more warlike, more advanced, in terms of technology, kind of human, us, East Europeans. So yeah, there are examples of sustainable tribes of people, but they're ultimately going to fall prey when you have technological advances by more competitive cultures and societies, I think. And if you did have a planet where everyone was kind of more sustainable, then they wouldn't develop the technology that would cause them to be able to reach across the universe.
Wow. Okay. This is a whole nother topic. So
yeah, it's going. I mean, I know I'm just sort of riffing, but it was just I was really fascinated by what you were saying.
Do we need the technology to expand across the universe? I'm a Star Trek fan.
Oh, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying I like it. I'm just explaining why I think we are where we are. Well, we do in a way, because the humans the organisms that develop the technology are privileged. They get all sorts of benefits because they come up with these new technologies and new techniques. They get privileges. They get, if they're male, they get more access to more female mates. They have more offspring, so those genes are passed down. And if they're female, they also will accumulate more resources, which they can use for their offspring so that they'll have better outcomes in life, and themselves generate more offspring.
Right. So humans, we are animals, and there are some things about us that are a little different. As Robin Wall Kimmerer and Lila June and others have noted, we can play a role in stabilizing ecosystems for all. So one of the differences is that Western systems, we plant for humans. We're only thinking about us. indigenous systems, and we adapt the earth to us. Indigenous systems adapt the humans themselves to the earth and to the ecosystem. That's a huge difference. And, you know, we could go back to, we could hunt, but we need to let wildlife recover. 10,000 years ago, before the advent of agriculture, humans and any domesticated animals we had, which was virtually none, were 1% of the Earth's mammalian biomass by weight. And 99%, 10,000 years ago, was wildlife. Now it's the other way around. Wildlife is 1.5% of the biomass. Humans are, I don't know, 23%. I have a chart somewhere. Cattle are like 62%. And then the other 23% or so are the other domesticated animals, the pigs and so on. So, okay. Sorry.
Well, this is, I just put that slide up because I think it's consistent with what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I want to get to that. So we often think with hunting, so I would say we can go back to hunting, but we need to wait until wildlife have had a chance to recover, and they can't recover until we restore ecosystems. So we've got to do a massive rewilding. And everybody says, well, we've already got too many deer. And I'm like, we only have too many deer because they don't have enough habitat. And because they're predators, we got rid of their predators because we don't want those predators predating on us either. So if the solution is not for us to start eating a lot of venison, the solution is for us to bring back habitat for the deer and to bring back their predators. You know, when we brought back the wolves to Yellowstone, oh my God, the whole ecosystem was restored in ways that humans attempt to mimic that could never have replicated. I don't know if you've seen it. There's wonderful clips online with George Monbiot talking about Yellowstone and the reintroduction of wolves and the impact that had. It affected everything, even the shapes of the rivers. I mean, just amazing. We can't do what wild predators can do, and we need to bring them back to the many areas that we can possibly do so. You know, there's a whole rights of nature movement, and you talk to white people about it and they go, oh, that's too controversial. Rivers have rights to not be polluted and not be dammed. Oh, that's too extreme. But you talk to this when the white lawyers who came up with the concept of the legal concept after borrowing it from indigenous peoples the world over, when those lawyers go and talk to indigenous people, they're like, how, we're used to white people being full of nonsense. You're actually making sense. Wow, there's a legal thing that can help us. Give me that piece of paper, white guy. You know, where's the pen? And 200 nations signed in the U.S. and Canada signed a rights of the grizzly bear treaty. And there was one indigenous activist, American Indian activist, who was, I can't remember his name, I can look it up, who said, the grizzly bear needs more habitat, so let's give him some. How many white people would say something like that? And yet, ironically, if you've got indigenous lands, if you've got a reservation, you want more land dedicated to the grizzly bear habitat, because if they don't have enough habitat, they're going to come looking for you, right? So this is what's happened with the polar bears. They're increasingly in human settlements in Alaska. So we need to think differently and look at this differently. And there was one activist, and again, I can't remember the name, who was invited to speak at a indigenous activist who was invited to speak at something like Bioneers, some sustainability conference. And they went to the elders first and said, do I have permission to go? And if so, what would you like me to say? And they said, yes, go and tell them that what they call sustainable is just more taking. What they call sustainable is just more taking. And the word sustainable, there's no such thing as more sustainable or less sustainable. It's like being pregnant or not. You're not a little pregnant. You either are or you're not. You're either sustainable or you're not. Sustainable means this can be done indefinitely without harmful repercussions against life on Earth. And these regenerative ag systems are not sustainable by that definition.
All right, Mary, we got a comment from Ari in the chat. Good information for awareness, but consumers have little leverage, or are politicians showing actual campaigns or actions? I think he's saying is, what do we do? How do we, okay, sounds good. How do we be the change that we need? Because it seems like we're almost going completely in the wrong direction. And before you answer, I do want to put up one more slide. I discussed this with Andy. This is relevant to that question. In China, it does appear that they have really started to get a handle on emissions. Now, they're not, as far as we can tell, reducing CO2 emissions, but they're flat. And maybe there'll be fewer emissions, CO2 in that country, even though the economy continues to grow in 25 than in 24. So how do we replicate or improve on what apparently China is able to do?
Well, I think rather than compare ourselves to China, we might want to just compare ourselves generally to what we need to do. China, that's amazing because of their huge populations. I want to go to what Ari was saying. You know, consumer boycotts have been very effective throughout history. So I don't want to underestimate consumer boycotts. I think the changes, if enough of us make these changes, it will have an impact. Even market systems like the one we have, if people aren't buying what they're selling, they're in trouble. Okay, so consumers can have a big role. That said, there is no substitute for something like the Chinese government or the government of Finland and others that are starting to have a carbon tax on animal product consumption. The problem here in the US is we have a two-party system. It's not in the Constitution. We can change it with ranked choice voting. I knew I'd find a way to bring that in, Hal. But we have two political parties, ruling parties, who are both keeping us right on track for runaway climate catastrophe. I remember when Trump got elected both in 2016 and then again recently, some of my friends were like, oh no, what are we going to do? The environment is going to go to hell in a handbasket. And I'm like, it already is under Biden and under Obama and under Clinton. You know, both of them have us on track for runaway climate disaster. These ruling parties don't work.
I'm with you 100% on that. I'm 100%. I was thinking about Clinton in some ways. I made the argument to people. I didn't vote for Trump, but I didn't vote for Clinton either in 2016 and likewise in 2024. But I made the argument to environmentalists that it's not a foregone conclusion that Trump would be even worse than Hillary on the environment. For example, people are like, oh, how could that be true? He's to deny it. He doesn't even accept that it's true. So I said, well, one example is that Trump doesn't support, quote, free trade, or at least he says he doesn't. He's for tariffs, and tariffs reduce the amount of planes flying north-south from South America to the U.S. to bring you your berries, and those container ships that are churning up the Pacific and destroying the marine life. And are so use the most filthy fuel imaginable. So tariffs reduce trade, and trade is among the worst causes of global warming. And people listen. I had people listen. Well, I understand that, but that's not the only. I said, yeah, it's not. The point is that they're both terrible. They're both going to be awful for the environment. You can't make a conclusion that somehow if you care about the environment, you have to vote for Hillary, because if you care about the environment, you can't vote for either one. That said, I remember talking to an activist, just a total Trump hater, Trump derangement syndrome, which I get. I understand. He's terrible. He's awful. I understand why you can't stand him. I made the point, look, you care about the environment. Harris is talking about fracking in PA and how she's going to frack. She's a fracker now. Well, I don't care about fracking. Who cares about it? Well, you should care. You should care. So there was a choice. We had a better choice both years. How come people, even putting aside ranked choice voting, putting aside all that, you could have voted. One could have voted. You voted for her. I voted for Jill Stein. Why is it such a heavy lift? Why is this impossible? Seemingly.
Well, part of it is this antiquated from the 1700s electoral system that we have, that forces voters into one of two camps, unless the voters say, I've had enough, I don't care. I know the electoral system is designed to kill third parties and to give me no choices, but I'm going to vote third party anyway. That's what I've been doing. I didn't vote for Trump, but I also didn't vote for Harris. You know, right. I refuse to vote for somebody who will not represent me and who is guaranteeing continued war and continued runaway climate disaster.
If she had said at any point, I'm going to take steps to reduce our support for Israel. If she had even said that, as weak, as awful as that would have been, it would have been enough for me to vote for her. But she didn't say that. Couldn't vote for her. Was not going to vote for genocide. And I get all the other issues that are so important that she's so bad on, whether it's the environment, healthcare. I mean, all of them. She's terrible. But Trump was that bad that I would have been able to say, okay, well, she would do something on one of the issues that's most important to me. But she wouldn't. So no. So I'm with you, Mary, but seems like we can't persuade people to join us. And I don't know. And that's what I know it's a hard question. I ask you some hard questions. You always answer them. You're great at it. But this one seems like a nut I can't crack.
To me, it's very similar to the not wanting to quit eating animals. Both of them are hard to crack. And we just have to keep trying to speak truth to power and put the truth out there and hope that people wake up. You know, I don't know what else to do.
Let me disagree with you on the animals versus the vote. Not eating animals does force an individual to give up something that gives them pleasure. But voting for Jill Stein has zero impact on your life whatsoever.
And I would thank you. That is a good distinction. I would say it's only short-term pleasure. It's long-term pain.
Okay.
Whether for your own personal health or the planet and the survival of life on Earth. I don't think people realize how bad it's going to be.
I agree with that.
We need to stop now. It's
well, people play slot machines and they know they're going to lose the money, but they still play. So, but in that instant, they get a little bit of a frisson of joy. I don't get it myself because I don't like losing money to casinos, but I guess some people do. But that, putting that aside, again, it's a cost-free decision to vote for a Green Party candidate, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, anytime I'm unwilling to make a change, even though the consequences long-term are dire, I always ask myself, am I addicted? Is there an addiction here? Animal products are high fat, and many of them are high salt. These are two of the three things that addict the human brain, the food substances that addict the human brain. Am I willing to let my addiction run my decisions? Or am I willing to think about this and make a change? The change is only hard temporarily. And for some of us, it's not hard. I also quit smoking back when I was 28. And I got to tell you, quitting smoking was really hard. Going vegan wasn't really that hard. So we often think it's going to be harder than it is. And there is for some people, it really is hard. But, you know, we've got to make the change.
Mary, we've gone over an hour. It's been a great conversation. Do you have something that you want to share that maybe I didn't ask you about, or you didn't fully elucidate or correct something that maybe was misstated during the program from your perspective now?
Well, there was a lot that we covered and didn't cover. And I just want to close with like best options. I have 5. 1 is respect Indigenous people's sovereignty and food traditions. And 2 is reduce wealthy populations' animal consumption to 10% or less of calories. 3 is shift from eating domesticated animals to wild ones, but we're going to have to wait until the 6th mass extinction has been reversed so that we can have consumption that's scalable, affordable, and sustainable. 4 is place strict controls to ensure that sufficient habitat, ecosystems, and wild animals are able to thrive and maintain the ecosystem services that all life on Earth needs. And we want to give priority to natural predators and indigenous people. And then the last thing is restore wild insect populations through habitat restoration and native plants to resume the traditional 5 to 10% of calories from wild insects, because humans have traditionally eaten insects, and our great ape species relatives do also.
I wish I had been ready with the slides. I could quickly type out those great suggestions, Mary. Really appreciate so much your time here. If you share them with me, I'll put them in the description of the program after the fact. Thanks again. Really appreciate your time and the obvious, passion and logic. It's not just passion; there's a reason behind your positions.
We can also add to the show notes. I can send you the link to the webinar that I did for the National Green Party on this topic this past August.
I'll put all that in the description. Absolutely. Have a great afternoon, Mary. Thanks all for watching, for listening. Thanks for being part of Halitics. I'll be back tomorrow. It won't be a free-for-all. We've got Carlos, the left-handed leftist, joining us for a wide-ranging discussion. I hope to get into some of the topics of the day, including end of the shutdown news. The Epstein files are definitely hitting the fan, and some other big topics as well. Well, who was the swastika painter there? Was it an Orthodox Jew? That's what some podcasters are saying. It's all tomorrow on Halitics.